That's it.
Okay, so good evening, everyone, and welcome to this sensitization webinar for parents entitled COVID-19 Vaccine and Your Child, hosted by Presentation College San Fernando, the Catholic Education Board of Management, and the Member of Parliament for San Fernando West, Honorable Faris Al-Rawi. I am Dexter Mitchell, Principal of Presentation College San Fernando, and I will be the moderator for this evening. At this time, I would want to invite the Vicar General of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Port of Spain to open us in prayer and deliver brief remarks on behalf of the Archbishop, Father Martin Sergio.
Let us pray. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Loving Creator and Sustainer, the world as we knew it is gone, and for what feels like such a long time, too many have experienced so much hardship during this pandemic. As our children prepare to walk into their schools, we pray for this new normal in the making. May our hearts be unified in you more than ever. May the tender moments of seeing someone again in person be all the more rich and treasured. May the reunions, interactions, and moments ahead become tender and precious memories as we turn to you in sincere gratitude. Help us to come out of this pandemic better, not bitter. Help us to become more considerate of others, more mindful of how we can help one another, starting in our own families, and how we can serve you and our neighbor well. And let us keep hope that no matter how dark the night might get, we may always bear the torch of the new dawn to come. Amen. Dear brothers and sisters, good evening. I thank Mr. Mitchell, the Principal of Presentation College San Fernando, for inviting me to this panel discussion on vaccination of our children against the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Parents are anxious about this step, as are students, and we are indeed grateful for the medical experts who have come here to allay our fears, inform us, and help set us at peace. We are at the moment in a state of flux, communitas, as opposed to community, where new norms are being formed, new methods of engagement created, new medicines tried, new ways of educating being practiced, and even discovering new ways of being religious. Yet, amidst all this flux, one thing remains constant: our love for our children and God, the axis around which our families revolve, around which Presentation College revolves. God's word to us in this time is, do not be afraid. Fearing dangers is natural, even commendable, but being overcome with fear is not. We live in a long arc of history. Looking back at that history, we have come through the collapse of the Roman Empire, the Dark Ages, the Spanish flu, 2 world wars, the AIDS epidemic, and now the COVID-19 pandemic. This too shall pass. Let us not forget our blessings, our enormous magnanimity, and the immense improvement in science and technology. Were it not for these, deaths would be several more millions. As we gather for this evening's event, it is a time to think about our children, their livelihood, and their future. We cannot do this in isolation, but as part of the common good. As His Grace the Archbishop has always said, this has been the strongest argument for vaccination, the common good, crossing barriers of race, class, religion, gender identity, politics, and geography. This is a presentation we make this evening through Presentation College, an argument for the common good in the hope that God will guide this open-ended future. Let me close by taking a cue from Master Oogway in Kung Fu Panda 2. Yesterday is history, tomorrow is mystery, today is a gift. which is why it is called present. God's grace is with us. Let us be open to the giftedness of the present. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vicar General. And for those who may be wondering, what is the Vicar General, or who is the Vicar General? The Vicar General is the second in command to the Archbishop. So thank you, Father Martin Sergio. I now invite to bring greetings on behalf of the Catholic Education Board of Management, the Chief Executive Officer, Mrs. Sharon Mangro. Mrs. Mangro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mitchell. The Honorable Faris Al-Rawari, Attorney General and MP for San Fernando West, Father Martin Sergio, Vicar General, Mr. Dexter Mitchell, Principal of Presentation College San Fernando, presenters, Dr. Ramnarayan Simangal, Dr. Pratt, Mr. Richard Robinson, colleagues in education, parents, students. The Catholic Church holds that parents are the primary educators of their children. We, the professional educators, are given the responsibility of providing support to parents. So with this in mind, I am really very pleased that the Catholic Education Board of Management can be part of this initiative to support parents by facilitating this information session. I hope that by the end of this session, you will have all of the information that you need in order to make the best decision for the health and the education of your child. I take the opportunity to thank all those who were instrumental in making this service available. Mr. Mitchell and the staff and the past pupils of Presentation College, the presenters, the Attorney General, whose intercession has caused this event to move from a small one for the appearance of Presentation College to one that is available to schools everywhere in Trinidad and Tobago. The technical team, and Mr. Richard Robinson, who has been working very, very hard to organize volunteers at short notice, to keep them organized, keep them engaged, keep things in order at the vaccination sites. To everybody, people who are working behind the scenes, who we don't mention, we can't mention, to everyone, thank you very much and have a very, very productive session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Mangro, Chief Executive Officer of the Catholic Education Board of Management. At this time, it gives me great pleasure to welcome, to bring greetings as well, the Attorney General and Member of Parliament for San Fernando West, Honorable Faris Al-Rawari.
Good afternoon to you, Mr. Mitchell. Good afternoon to all our distinguished members of this forum, with all protocols observed. Permit me to bring greetings from the Government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, particularly as the Member of Parliament for San Fernando West, and with the Naparima Basin in mind, we have a significant number of schools in our flock. We have been very aggressive in procuring the widest vaccination supply for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. The cohort of our students is one that is very much paramount in our minds. And therefore, I had great pleasure in being the participant to secure the arrangements from a legal perspective from the government of the United States of America in what will amount to over 900,000 vaccines in the Pfizer category. This means that a significant portion of our country can receive, starting with our children, now expanded into our post-first trimester mothers who are pregnant. We have a significant avenue of protection available for our very vulnerable grouping in terms of the tenderness of age. The COVID pandemic is one that has released a significant amount of, unleashed and released a significant amount of pain to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We are wrestling with the battle between lives and livelihood. We are also at a very important juncture of watching the vaccine pickup be a significant issue. And therefore, this forum provides a very important platform to address the concerns that occupy the minds of parents, guardians, persons with responsibility for our children, as we make that informed decision and provide consent for our children to be vaccinated. We desperately wish to see our Form 1s, who are now in Form 3, meet their colleagues and peers. For those of us who call Presentation College our alma mater, and any other school that has alma mater, those of us who know what Form 1, Form 2, and Form 3 meant in terms of the relationships that we built, that human connectivity, we want to give our children that benefit and pleasure. Parents have had to double resource to become parents who work from home and to also become persons who are now very close to what teachers have had to live in becoming tutors and supervisors, and parents now understand very intimately how valuable our teaching service is. But there are a number of students who were left behind because of the lack of physical interaction. So as Member of Parliament for San Fernando West, as the Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, my mission is to facilitate and assist in every way possible to address the concerns of vaccine issues, to facilitate the conversations, to ask for volunteers to step forward, because a number of our concerns really start with, is this vaccine right for me? Do I have a medical condition that ought to be considered? Can I make a properly informed decision and give informed consent for this? So I want to thank the coordinators of this particular meeting for doing this reach out. It is critical to success. I can tell you from the government's perspective that we intend to open mass vaccination, to have schools approach the vaccination issue in blocks, and if necessary, to go as far as bringing vaccines to the arms in the communities where this happens. I look forward to participating in this event today. I ask only one bit of permission to do a live interview on CNC3 as we approach the news hour just after that, but I will be participating with fervor in this afternoon session, and I thank you for this opportunity to make these remarks.
Thank you very much, Honorable Faris Al-Rawi, MP for San Fernando West and Attorney General, for facilitating this vaccination drive in San Fernando. This sensitization exercise is as a result of the current drive by the Ministries of Health and Education to have our school population between the ages of 12 and 18 fully vaccinated in order to facilitate the reopening of school on a face-to-face basis. This is a massive undertaking, and there's a call for volunteers from among parents and the general public. To this end, I would like the National Youth Vaccine Coordinator to bring us up to speed on the volunteer program. I now introduce Mr. Richard Robinson.
Hi, good afternoon. Good day, Honorable Faris Al-Rawi, Attorney General and MP for San Fernando. Good evening, Mr. Moderator, Mr. Dexter Mitchell, Principal. And I would like to state all other protocols observed. I am here to give you some information as to what is happening on the volunteer level out at the vaccination drive. Now, to put this in perspective, the Ministry of Education has approached the Scout movement, Scout City, to assist them in delivering volunteers to 9 out of the 16 sites that they have set up to do specifically the vaccinations for the children of Trinidad and Tobago. And if you just allow me to present, right, thank you. So, Scouts TT, who, why, how? At Scouts TT, we have a mission to contribute to the development of young people in achieving their full physical, intellectual, social, and spiritual potential as individuals, right? To make them full responsible citizens and members of national, local, and international importance through their communities and through the principles and practices of our movement. Some of the things of Scout City, we are the largest youth organization in Trinidad and Tobago. We create leaders of tomorrow through non-formal values-based programs that offers young people from the ages of 17 to 19 years old fun and challenging activities, unique experiences, everyday adventure, and the chance to help others so that we may make a positive impact in communities. Scouting helps children and young adults to develop skills including teamwork, time management, leadership, initiative, planning, communication, self-motivation, cultural awareness, and commitment. We prepare young people to get jobs and teach them to save lives and even change the world. And at Scout City, we produce productive citizens by teaching them values of integrity, fitness, personal responsibility, self-reliance, and duty as defined by our promise and law. What was our mission on this vaccine drive? So, Scout City decided we were to provide voluntary non-medical support functions to designated vaccination sites for the Ministry of Education students between the ages of 12 to 18 in the administration of the Pfizer vaccine to the population for first and second doses of this Pfizer vaccine. I am now just going to go quickly over what a typical volunteer is exposed to, because people would ask us, well, as a volunteer, what is it that I am going to be exposed to? What is it I'm going to do? Well, a typical vaccination site has a workflow. Scout City have been involved with the mass vaccination site since their inception about 4 months ago. So we have provided volunteers in about 3 very big mass vaccination sites. So we have a pretty good idea of how these vaccination sites work. So a typical workflow as a vaccination site will work like this. You would come in and there will be a security check. And the security purpose of the security check will, of course, would be to limit persons on site, maintain order on the outside, and distribute registration forms. You would then go to pre-registration, which our volunteers would also be there to help you assemble in order, usher you, help you fill out the registration forms, sanitize you, take your temperature check, right? We will then carry you on to the registration part of the site, which will be to verify your documents, write and create and write up vaccine cards as necessary. And also too, at this point, we also do some sort of double checking to make sure that your identity is validated. We will then move you on to medical screening. And some of our volunteers, some of the older ones who are trained, would also assist in patient triage and also to refer you to doctors if they need authorizations. Okay. After medical screening, you would then go to where you would actually get the vaccination, right? Now, we provide volunteers would do ushering. We would help with the recording of the vaccine information and contact info after you've got the vaccine into logs so that we have a log of it that we help with the medical records. And in observation, we would then escort you down to observation where you would spend a little time after receiving your vaccine just so that the doctors can observe you and make sure that there are no adverse reactions. So we help validate the vaccine cards at observation, meaning that we stamp them with the date, time, and the official stamp. And we also help with medical observation and discharge. We basically help the doctors identify if anybody is feeling ill in terms of pointing them out or helping them, or when they are about to leave, if they need any kind of assistance, right? And as True Scouts, we also help the elderly, infirmed, or disabled through the sites as necessary. So this is just a typical workflow of what a vaccine site would look like. All right. Some of the things that we are responsible for doing at the vaccine site, we have site captains. This is how we organize. So each site, when you go there, will have someone that will be in charge of the group of volunteers at the site. and making sure that the volunteers are looked after and that the volunteers are placed where they need to be placed. These site captains liaise with the medical staff and the site administration to help, smooth things over and make your experience as you go there, a very smooth one. And from all intents of what I've been reading in the press, this has been working quite well. People have been saying that, there've been a smooth flow of people to get vaccine at our sites where we have volunteers with no big crowds, etc. We do rotation in terms of when you're a volunteer. You don't just go there and sit in one position for the whole day. We try to rotate you around so that you get experience in nearly all the positions that are available, right? So that you break the monotony, right? Flexibility. From day to day, sites may change in terms of how they operate, right? We are flexible in how we deploy and how we manage our volunteers to adapt to new duties. We have a very quick training methodology that we use to bring you up to speed so that we can fill the needs of the sites as necessary. We also promote fairness. In other words, we constantly monitor to make sure that our volunteers are not being overloaded or any one volunteer is being overloaded in our workflow. We try to have backups so that we can level it off. We monitor breaks, right? So that most sites operate from beginning to end without closing or any kind of stopping for rest breaks like lunch, etc. So we also make sure that we have people to cover and relieve people in different areas so that people can have their breaks as necessary without disrupting the constant workflow that is at the site, right? And logging, we also make sure that we log volunteer hours. So at the end of the particular exercise, you can get a listing of your hours if you want a little certificate saying that you volunteered to this particular exercise, right? So moving on to some stats. But before I begin to engage in this, I would just like to say that becoming a volunteer is a pretty simple process with us, right? We have a flyer out, and I will forward the flyer as well to the principal for him to post up afterwards. But our flyer out has a number on the flyer in which we encourage you to WhatsApp that number to get information. Our whole process is digitally driven. So when you start, you send a WhatsApp with your name and your number. We send you back information of what the process is, what is it you would be expected to do. If you are still interested at the end of that, you tell us, yes, you're still interested. We'll then join you to a chat group. And in the chat group, there will be some short instructional videos about what to expect at a site, etc. As well as there will be a registration form that you will fill out digitally, indicating where you would like to volunteer, the times, the dates, etc. that you would like to volunteer. And you get to choose your sites, you get to choose your times, you get to choose your dates. And at that point, we would then roster you depending on which site requires the resources on those particular dates, right? So I'm just going to go into some stats now that I'm pretty sure this is what normally everybody wants to see. So today, as of today, we had volunteers signed up in our program, 438 volunteers all over the country of Trinidad. We are not currently providing volunteers in Tobago. That's being handled by a separate process. But currently we have 438 volunteers signed up across Trinidad. To date, we have, over the last 3 days, we have provided to the 9 sites that we're sending volunteers, 348 volunteers, right, to fill those particular sites. So those volunteers some of them go all day, some of them go half day in the morning, some of them go half day in the evening. But in terms of bodies, we sent out about 348 bodies to the 9 different sites that we have across Trinidad and Tobago. Sorry, Trinidad. And here's the piece that normally people want to see, which is the sites. So we have Pleasantville Technology Center, MIC, San Fernando. And that figure that you see there at the end of it, that 1241 is the amount of estimated vaccines that we have assisted deliver at that site. So from Wednesday to now, there's an estimate of 1,241 students that got vaccinated at that site. The National Energy Skills Center in La Brea, which is currently 293. But there will be something special happening with that La Brea site next week. There will be a rotation with Point Fortin, where 1 week will be La Brea, the next week will be Point Fortin. The indoor facility at Point Fortin is going to be used to deliver vaccines there. So our volunteers would also need to be at Point Fortin. So we are also now looking for people from those areas to volunteer so that we can have enough volunteers to go down to point 14 when that time comes, right? The Myocarditis Civic Center, we estimate that we have helped vaccinate 122 patients there. The Larigone Stadium in Arima is one of our sites. We estimate that we have helped vaccinate 822 patients there. Lenance Nori Community Center in Toko, well, that's one that have been pretty slow, but our estimate there is about 20 to 40 patients at that particular site, right? The Hansraj Samar Singh Multipurpose Complex, Claro, we have not gotten any figures in from there as yet, so I don't want to speak about there or Durante Gardens in Sandy Grande. The Costat City Campus, Port of Spain, our estimate there is that we've helped vaccinate 339 persons, and our Costat Campus, El Dorado, we have also helped at this point vaccinate 898 persons, right? So the volunteering is an ongoing process. We are committed to help in this process for the next 6 weeks at least, right? The process of the vaccination is that you have the first vaccine administered, and then you have to wait 3 weeks before the second one is administered. And we are committed to be working right through that whole 6-week period with partnering with the Ministry of Education and the population of Trinidad and Tobago and the Ministry of Health in providing volunteers to these sites to help the non-medical staff with their duties and to take some of the burden off of them, right? So that's my presentation today. Thank you, everyone. As I said, for more information, you can check our webpage, or pretty soon we'll be sending a release out to the different social media groups. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Mr. Robinson, and I would like to encourage those listening to volunteer in this very important exercise. And I'm very grateful that Point Fortin now has a site. In fact, just today I was talking with the MP and we were discussing that. We now move into the main segment of this evening's webinar. We have with us 4 highly qualified and experienced medical doctors. 3 will present tonight, and the 4th one will join the panel for the questions and answer segment. Participants, parents, students, you are asked to put your questions in the chat, and as moderator, I will field them to our panelists. Joining us tonight is Dr. David Bratt, CMT, MD, MPH, Johns Hopkins, 1977. Dr. Bratt is a pediatrician, former senior lecturer, child health, University of the West Indies, PAHO and WHO consultant of diarrheal diseases for 30 years, 1980 to 2010. A Guardian columnist for the last 20 years and author of Book of Bratts and holder of the Shakonia Medal. Dr. Bratt will speak to us on the importance of vaccinating children, its benefits and realities. Our second presenter tonight is Dr. Ian Ramnarine, consultant chest surgeon at the Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex since 2007. A graduate of Presentation College and studied medicine at UWI, Mona, and Cave Hill. Dr. Ramnarine completed his postgraduate surgical and cardiothoracic training in the United Kingdom. He has looked after and operated on COVID-19 patients. He said he's a lover of cricket and supporter of Liverpool Football Club. Dr. Ramnarine's presentation tonight is entitled COVID, Background and Vaccination. And we are very fortunate to have Professor Terence Simongal, Dean, Faculty of Medical Sciences, UWI St. Augustine. In fact, he is Professor of Internal Medicine, and Professor will present on the nature and science behind vaccines, dispelling the myths. And joining us on the panel as well is Dr. Prithviraj Bahadur Singh, who is a pediatric development specialist. And I will tell you a little bit about Dr. Bahadur Singh when he joins the panel. So at this time now, we want to move into the first presentation, the importance of vaccinating children, its benefits and realities. And I hand over to Dr. David Bratt.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. I want first of all to thank Presentation College and the Catholic Education Board of Management and the Member of Parliament for this invitation to this webinar on COVID-19 the vaccine and your child. All protocols observed, but especially to all of the parents looking on, and also to the volunteers and that fantastic vaccination program that we just heard a bit about. The question that I want to address tonight is, should children be vaccinated against COVID-19? Should children be vaccinated against COVID-19? If you had asked me this question 2, maybe 3 weeks ago, I would have told you that I'm not sure. I was 50-50 about it. The reason for this is because the problem with injecting a foreign substance into the body of the child is that you have to make sure that you're not going to do worse than the disease that you're trying to prevent. Now, up to that point, 2 or 3 weeks ago, COVID-19, with the occasional exception, was not seen as a serious disease of children. Like any facet of human life, exceptions would occur. And although they are unfortunate and devastating for the individual, child, and families involved, it's unethical to make decisions that could affect millions and millions of children based on the relatively few serious adverse effects that COVID-19 realized on individual children. So I want to go on to talk a little bit about mortality. And please forgive me if some of this comes over as a bit crass. I am a doctor. I deal with death all the time. We doctors deal with death all the time. And sometimes we may seem to be immune or not aware enough of the significance of death. Believe me, we are. We now have real life experience with deaths in children from COVID-19. And those deaths are incredibly rare. And I want to make that point again and again. England has a population of about 12 million children under the age of 18. During the period March 2020 to February 2020, the English were very good at collecting statistics, unlike us. During that period, 3,105 children died in England of various things. How many died of COVID-19? 25. 25 children died of COVID-19 in England in a 12-year period, in a 12-month period during the height of the epidemic. That works out to about 2 children a month, or if you want, 2 deaths from COVID for every million children. The equivalent here in Trinidad would be 1 or 2 children dying from COVID. And in fact, this is exactly what has happened. There have been 3 deaths from COVID in children under the age of 18. And all 3 of those, by the way, were in children over the age of 50. Of the 25 children who died, it's important to know that 19 of them had a serious underlying condition: severe brain disease, congenital heart disease, cancer, severe pulmonary disease, and so on. If we cross the Atlantic to the USA, they have a population of 73 million children. These children, these deaths in the USA by children account for 1% of all the people who have died. It's about just under 500 cases since the epidemic began. So death is rare. Now, what about illness itself, morbidity? The figures are also reassuring. Half of children who get COVID are asymptomatic, no signs. Most of the others have mild signs. A few children, 1, maybe up to 2%, get admitted to hospital. And a small subsection of these end up in ICU. And you all have heard of this so-called deadly disease, the multisystemic inflammatory disease associated with COVID. It's nice to know that we have had about 51 cases in Trinidad of this. Not a single child has died. We also, so the morbidity is there. It's mild in most of the cases. So if you look at COVID, you have to ask yourself, why are we so eager to immunize all of these children? Well, we're also concerned about something else called long COVID. Long COVID is COVID that lasts longer than the usual 2 weeks. In the beginning, we thought maybe 5–10% of children would have this. It turns out the latest study about 3 weeks ago in Lancet says that less than 2 out of every 100 children may suffer from this. It's not a small amount, but by and large, it's not as bad as we thought it was. So to date, most children who have got COVID get over it very quickly. Now, we always have concerns about the very long-term effects of the illness, which has only been around for 1 year. You can get mild cases of things like rheumatic fever and so on as a child, kidney disease and whatnot, and years later, you pay for it. So we don't know the long-term effects of this illness. The thing is that we have to make decisions now on the information available, not on the possibility of problems in the future, which, unless this virus behaves differently to every single other virus known to man, is highly unlikely that we are going to have long-term problems. Now, another reason at the time, 2 or 3 weeks ago, not to immunize children was that this would be taking away vaccines from our vulnerable population. As of last week, only 30% of the people over age 18 were completely immunized. That's extremely low. I know of many people over the age of 60 who have not been able to be immunized. Many of them, most of them, are obese. Obesity is a problem in the country. Many of them have diabetes. Many of them have all of these comorbidities are concerned. So the question always was at that time, is it ethical to immunize children against a disease that was not killing many, was not making them very sick, when you had elderly people dying of the same disease, which could be prevented by a vaccine, which for whatever reason they were not able to get. So what happened to change my opinion? Because I've changed my opinion in the last 2 weeks. I now believe that all children should be vaccinated against COVID-19, at least the children between 12 and 19, and hopefully by the beginning of next year, children from as young as 6 months to 12 are probably going to be vaccinated. Well, there are 3 things happened. 2 of them were arrivals, and the last one, I'll say it right now, is the desperate need to start back, as Dexter said, face-to-face, regular school, because the children are suffering. I'm now seeing every day in my small, limited private practice, children with sleep problems, children with feeding problems, children who have put on enormous amounts of weight, which they are not going to be able to get rid of, and which constitutes obesity in childhood, which is a problem and which makes them predisposed to serious illness when they get COVID. The mental problems, tics, headaches, abdominal pain, anything you want. The kids are suffering. The 2 other things that happened were the 2 arrivals in the country. And the first one was a large amount of vaccines. We now have enough vaccines that we can basically, thanks to the government, immunize everybody in the country if we want, and immunize them properly, and you have a choice. And the second thing that happened, the key factor, was the Delta variant arrived. So we know we have 3 cases of Delta, and most practitioners suspect that there are more. The Delta variant is more contagious to children, and not necessarily more deadly. We aren't sure of that as yet, but it's more contagious. And because it's more contagious, there are more cases, and therefore there are more serious cases, and it's attacking all the younger age groups. In the United States right now, today, over 90% of COVID cases are due to the Delta. It swept the United States the same way it swept India back in May, and it swept England, the United Kingdom back in June and July. Children in the USA now make up more than 1 in 5 cases of COVID-19, 20%. The percentage of total COVID-19 cases represented is growing. For the week ending August the 5th, it was 14.3% of the cases at that point in time. It's now 20%. Compared with in 2020, it was less than 2%. So it's sweeping the states. As an example of the seriousness, more than 90% of the ICU cases in the state of Texas, the pediatric ICU cases, are full. On August 13th, there were no pediatric ICU beds in the city of Dallas. You can find these statistics all over the place. The UK, which had been holding out up to this month not to immunize children, they have now taken the decision because of the Delta to begin immunizing the 16 and 17-year-olds. And by the way, they will immunize a 15-year-old, a 15-year, 9-month-old if the parents want. So what has happened? The balance has changed. The balance has changed. The vaccine is effective. We know it's effective. It's not as effective, the ones that we have, the original ones, as against the original strain. But we know they're very effective against serious disease. It's worthwhile taking as long as the side effects. So we come back to my original sentence. You have to be sure before you put something into a child, a growing child, that it's not going to cause more harm than the disease itself. So the figures are, as of mid-July, the USA had immunized 9 million children, a lot of children, and they had received the Pfizer vaccine. There were just over 9,000 side effects, 9,000 in 9 million. Of these 9,000, 8,000 were mild, the sort of thing you expect. You put a needle into a child's arm, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt for a little while. You may or may not get some fever and muscle aches, mild. So there were just about 1,000 cases which were considered serious. Most fortunately, the myocarditis in this case is not severe, and all the cases have recovered. There's a comparison that you need to know too. So if you give the vaccine, you run out every 20,000 cases, you run the risk of one child getting myocarditis, mild myocarditis, which up to now they have recovered fully. If you get COVID, the figure is for every 43 cases of COVID, you get a case of myocarditis. So you can see it's much less common. And the management of this disease now and in the future is going to be managing risk, which is a very difficult thing for people to understand. Now, I have to say, long-term effects of myocarditis, we don't know. We don't know what is going to happen. But the schools need to be opened. To open the schools, to make people feel safe, teachers and students have to be vaccinated. The potential risks of in-person learning pale in comparison to the emotional and educational benefits of going back to face-to-face. So the weight of evidence has shifted considerably towards vaccination children. This decision ultimately has to be made, I believe, by you, the parents, and the children. I myself have told my daughter that she should vaccinate her 13-year-old child, my 13-year-old granddaughter. I want to see her vaccinated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bratt. And of course, remember to post your questions, and after the presentations, our panelists will answer them. I now take this opportunity to invite Dr. Mrna to present on COVID background and vaccination. Dr. Mrna.
Hi, good afternoon. It's very difficult to follow Dr. Bratt, but I'll try my best. And good afternoon, all protocols observed. First of all, I'd just like to thank the Catholic Education Board of Management for allowing me to present on the boring subject of what actually COVID is, the background about it, and about vaccination. So this slide just shows where we are in Trinidad and Tobago. We're into our third wave. The first one barely a blip way back in February to March last year, then August last year, and in August last year, that's when I caught COVID, and now from April this year going straight on. And you can see the figures that the new cases, daily new cases, coming down slowly but surely, as are the deaths. This is
Can you
the
share
virus.
the slides, Doctor? Could you share the
I
slides?
was hoping there was being slide. Hold on a second. Is that okay?
Yes, we are seeing the slides.
Lovely. So I just spoke about the background information about what I was doing and just said where we are in Trinidad and Tobago now with our third phase of COVID, and the numbers are coming down gradually. This is a picture of the virus, the coronavirus 2, SARS-CoV-2, and it looks like a beach ball with these little spikes on it, which you've heard a lot about, called the spike protein. And the middle of it is the RNA that's responsible for infecting us. But it's a whole unit, the beach ball, the spikes, and the RNA. And this is what we're fighting, we're battling. So when we wash our hands, that membrane that's made up, the beach ball surface itself, that's made up of lipids, when we wash our hands and we soap it up good and for 5 minutes, that destroys that membrane, as does alcohol, over 70%. And those spike proteins that you see on the surface are what we concentrate on when we're doing vaccination. We are trying to get an immune response attacking those spike proteins on the surface. So when they make their way into your body's antibodies are ready to attack something with those spike proteins and move on and kill that virus. So what happens during a viral infection? You start off an exposure where you touched something that's got COVID on it, and then you touch your nose or touch your eyes. It makes its way onto your mucous membranes and goes through that little beach ball, makes its way into your own cells. And in your cells, it displays its own RNA into your cell's mechanism and starts reproducing inside there and makes a tunnel. One will multiply and make thousands after that. So the viral load suddenly increases within your body. And what really causes the symptoms and the peak and all that is not merely the viral infection, which irritates you, but also the body's response to the infection. Your body starts producing antibodies that kills it off. So what you have is exposure first and infection. It enters the cell, the virus multiplies, the cell dies, and it spreads all these new viruses throughout your body. And then, most importantly, the body reacts. And this is what happens. This is the body's reaction here. These little things on the surface of the beach ball with those little spikes on it are called antibodies. And they're attacking that virus, trying to kill it. When that happens, it can happen two ways in terms of how the symptoms and recovery go. We get chest infections or flus or pneumonias or viral infections all the time. And the majority of them, the number of viral cells in you peaks, your body attacks them, and the number just goes down and you recover. Minor blip on the surface, maybe a little tiredness, a cough, a runny nose, etc. But why is COVID so dangerous? Why is COVID so serious? It's because the body attacks itself. When we create antibodies to fight off this virus, what's happening is the body's antibodies are actually attacking the viral protein on top of it, on the surface marker on it. Those are what they call the S protein. But they can find similar markers on other cells in the body. such as in the lungs, in the blood vessels of the lungs, in the liver, the kidneys, the intestines, even the eyes and nose have similar cells, and the heart and other blood vessels throughout the body contain surface markers that may be attacked by COVID. So there lies the issue with this one. And what is really happening here now is that once the virus starts multiplying in you, you produce your antibodies, you start not only attacking the virus, and you can get rid of the virus. Your PCR may be negative, but your body continues to attack itself. And this is why we see in this one, this is a COVID patient, a friend of mine who unfortunately is no longer with us. This black area is his lung, the white area is his heart, and this other black area is the left lung. And when he passed on, this here is what happened. And you can see all the little white little things going off all there. And these are inflammatory response as a result, not of an infection with the virus, but the body's reaction to it. And this is why our treatments are geared towards dealing with not so much the virus itself, but the consequences of viral infection. And COVID has a spectrum of diseases. You can be asymptomatic. When I had it myself, I did not have any symptoms at all. I was traced because I was a contact, I was a primary contact, and I was found to be positive. There are some who have mild flus, but in about 15%, they have a tremendous bad immune response of about very bad shortness of breath, fevers, muscle pains, etc. And in 1 to 2% of all patients who have COVID, they die. And there are a variety of treatments that are geared towards this, and that's not what I'm going to be talking about today, because we're talking about vaccination. The vaccines themselves. And there are a number of vaccines that have been on the market for some time. These vaccines were developed rather quickly, and there's been some controversy about that, but the technology has been there for a very long time. Since the 1930s, we've known about the immune system and how to boost it. So the techniques we've been using have been available for a long time. So I'm just going to talk to you all about the different types of vaccines and how they work. And the dead virus, when we take that same coronavirus, we take a whole vat of them and we kill all the viruses, and then we use that dead virus to inject into the body because it's still got the surface protein on it. This is what Sinopharm, Sinovac, and a couple of other newer ones are doing. This is old technology. We've used that for oral polio and other infections in the past to vaccinate against them. Of course, it's a new virus we're dealing with. So we're using old technology to deal with a new virus. And what we've seen in Trinidad and all around the world really is that the Sinopharm vaccine has a low risk profile and it works. There are minimum side effects. There's some concern that you may need a third shot booster with Sinopharm. But I'll tell you something, all the vaccines may require a booster. And we have to watch the space and decide about what's going to happen later on. The viral vector, the Oxford AstraZeneca, what happens here is the surface marker protein that we were talking about, the S proteins there, are actually placed on top of another virus, an adenovirus that causes a problem in chimpanzees, but not in humans. And it's put as a label onto those, and we are injected with it. And when we get injected with it, our body recognizes it as foreign and produces antibodies to it. It does not cause an infection, but there are problems with the vaccine. These problems are rare, but my job is just to explain to you what these problems are. And one of the problems we know about with the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson viruses, with the viral vectors, is thrombosis occurs, especially if you're a female 18 to 40 age group. However, these side effects of thrombosis are extremely rare. There's something in the order of 4 in a million. And if it will cause death, it only occurs in about 1 in a million, potentially. We've not seen that in Trinidad. We've seen where Oxford AstraZeneca was in use in Canada, and they pulled it because they found that in Canada, they had a higher incidence of complications. However, they had a number of other vaccines to choose from, so that made their decision to pull it easier. My own personal opinion is that the AstraZeneca vaccine, out of all of them, is probably the most efficacious out of all of them. The mRNA vaccines that are produced by Pfizer and Moderna are the latest. These are new technology. And what they do is they create an mRNA and put it in a lipid capsule. And basically, that's why it needs to be stored at low temperatures and then reconstituted and injected. And what it does is now that mRNA goes into your cell and uses your own cells to produce these spike proteins. And then when you produce a spike protein, your body produces antibodies towards that. But there are systemic side effects. There are mild thrombosis incidences with this as well. And you've heard Dr. Bratt talk about the incidence of myocarditis, especially in younger men. These are good vaccines. They are very effective. So a word now about what we mean by how effective these vaccines are. I've just spoken to you about how they work, but what's the sense of using them at all? Now, the initial studies, when they talk about 95% effective for Pfizer, 94 for Moderna, 66 for Johnson & Johnson, and AstraZeneca was 70%, we talk about prevention from getting infected. But with variation in the production of it, with mutations and variants coming on board, there will be changes to how the vaccines, how effective the vaccines are. The most important factor is not merely the prevention from getting infected, it's actually preventing major illness or preventing dying from infection from COVID. And these are what all the vaccines do. They prevent you going to hospital, and they reduce the incidence of dying, the risk of dying from it. There are risks of being vaccinated, such as the muscle and joint pain, the headache, fever, pain at the injection site, tiredness, clot formation, and COVID infection. You can even become infected after being vaccinated. But when you contrast that with the risks of actually being infected with COVID, you'll see there's some of the very same complications occurring there. The clot formation risk is about 40,000 times as much if you're infected with COVID than it is from a vaccination. Dr. Bratt just spoke to you about the risk of myocarditis in young males with Pfizer injection. And the risk of myocarditis, if you get COVID in that age group, is 43. 43 times. Sorry, I'm getting numbers wrong there, but it's significantly greater. I think it's 43% of them have a risk of developing myocarditis. Nope, I got those numbers wrong. My apologies. I'll have to refer back to Dr. Bratt for that one. But the fact is, the risk of infection with COVID gives you a 2% chance of dying. And that should be the big number that we concentrate on as we go through talking about the effectiveness of vaccination. A word on testing. Now, there are a number of different things. People always worry that they may have COVID. The initial test we talk about is clinical, if you've had exposure or if you have the symptoms of it. And then there are other tests we do, the nasal swab for PCR, and then the antibody tests and the antigen tests. So I'll just talk about that. And these are the main ones, the antigen test, antibody tests, and the PCR, which is the mainstay. The polymerized chain reaction test is a nasal swab specifically for the COVID virus. It's accurate, very accurate if you're symptomatic. So if you have symptoms and they swab you and it comes back positive, you definitely have COVID. And if you swab you and it's negative, you definitely didn't have COVID, because there are other things can mimic this. And it usually started rising 4 to 10 days after infection with COVID or from the contact. But it's expensive and it takes some time to come back. Unfortunately, I read with chagrin, I read with great worry that every day when we see those numbers come up, represents tests that were done in the last 2 to 3 or sometimes 4 and 5 days. We really do need to get our act together and get those PCR results back in a hurry. Antigen test. This is a more recent type of test, and we're actually not checking for the virus itself, but for viral protein. And it can be a nasal swab, oral swab, other different types of swabs. And the problem with it is the accuracy of it. And you have to check and see each one has different accuracies with it. It is a good one, not just to test as a diagnostic test, but if you've got a workplace where you're checking people regularly, it's a good one to do every week to check antigen tests. If they are symptomatic, you really should do a PCR on them rather than an antigen test. Antibody test is a blood test. We check to see if your body's produced antibodies to COVID. It's quick, it's got medium expense, and it's accurate once you've been infected or vaccinated. The IgM levels rise early and the IgG rise later. What's the best vaccine? Well, choice is nice. But the subject of this talk really is about the Pfizer vaccine for children. But the big question I have, I'm not going to be even going to that. I'm an adult cardiothoracic surgeon, and we've just had the pediatrician who I respect and I take his word quite seriously, is how effective is vaccination in general. And when you look at the world situation, on the left here, I've got a chart showing what percentage of people in each of these populations, from Canada, 73%, UK, 70%, etc., down to Australia and Tobago, 33%, just hot on the heels of Barbados at 35%. Even though they started long before us, and way down the bottom, Jamaica at 8.7%, and Bahamas at 16%. But you can see what the world daily new cases are rising again. So about our fourth peak as our daily new cases rise. And the deaths worldwide are rising again. But my question is, how effective is vaccination? And these are very, very, very important figures. This is what's going on in the USA. Currently, United States says 51% of their population is fully vaccinated and 60% have had one shot. But you can see every day the daily cases are rising and rising and rising, and so are the deaths. The deaths are going up. But the deaths aren't going up as much as it used to be, you know. Look at it. The numbers are going up, and they're in trouble because the ICUs are chock-a-block of people who are unvaccinated. But the total numbers are not rising as great as it used to before. And I'm putting it to you that that's probably because of half the population being vaccinated. Let's look at another situation. What's happening in the UK? In the UK, they're going through their 1, 2, 3, 4th wave. And the numbers are still quite high. Their country is now finally opened up, and they are walking around without masks, going to football games, and which I'm jealous of, etc. But the country is 70% fully vaccinated, with 61% having had 2 shots. Look at how many deaths they have. The hospitalizations are rising, yes, but their deaths are only a fragment of it, and usually in the unvaccinated population. This is a little bit far out. Let's look a little closer to home. What's going on in Jamaica? Jamaica's population is 8.7% with 2 shots. With 1 shot. About 4% of its population has had 2 shots. And look, they're hitting another peak way, way off, and their deaths are rising. They've just gone into a 7-day no movement situation again. And unless they get that vaccination off the ground and hit that 50, 60%, they're in trouble. They really are. And the numbers show you it. So what's going on home? At home, our numbers are coming down. We have hit 30, how much is it? 33%, 25% by now, fully vaccinated. So our numbers are coming down, our deaths and our numbers there. And I suspect that, as Dr. Brad put it, and many people think that the Delta is actually a lot more responsible for cases in the community than we think. As far as it goes for vaccinating 12 to 18-year-olds, there are a number of different people I looked at to see the information. The World Health Organization says definitely if you have a 12 to 18-year-old or a child who is a high risk, they must be vaccinated. I agree with that completely. CDC goes a little further and say all children 12 to 18 should be vaccinated, and they're getting a lot of trouble over that. The Pediatric Society in Trinidad and Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago Medical Association, and the government have all said they would think that the best approach for Trinidad and Tobago, and it's very important to get our country open and to get those numbers up, is for every child to be, every child in the 12 to 18 age group to be vaccinated. And I support this. Then, as Dr. Bratt already pointed out, the variants are on the way, and the response to the variants is it's infecting more younger and younger people, and we don't know what's coming up there. The 2 cases of Delta, more than that now in Trinidad. But when we look at the information for Trinidad alone, at the weekly press conference 2 weeks ago, these were the numbers that were presented to us. And it said quite clearly, vaccination percentages for HDU admissions. Bear in mind that to be fully vaccinated, you must have had all your shots and be at least 2 weeks post that. And the vast majority of patients, 90% of all HDU admissions had not been vaccinated at all. The remainder, 9.6, were not fully vaccinated, had one shot and still contracted COVID and ended up in the HDU. As far as the ICU goes, it was a similar picture. ICU admissions was 84% who were unvaccinated. Only 15% had had partial vaccination, but no ICU patient was fully vaccinated. And this is the clincher. Of all patients who had died from May 14th this year to about 2 weeks ago when this slide was released, it was 860 patients they spoke about. 833 of them were all unvaccinated. So we can see that vaccination does prevent you from getting into hospital and prevent you from dying. Moving into the future, unfortunately, even when we get vaccinated, because the entire population has not been, we will have to continue social distancing, continue wearing masks. We have to get vaccinated. We have to look at whether the recommendation is for booster vaccinations. And as different strains come up, they may be developing different types of vaccines that may be recommended. A number of people have asked me personally about taking a booster. It makes no sense. If you are fully vaccinated, you are fully vaccinated. There's no need to get another vaccination, a different type at this stage. Really, you wait until the recommendation comes out. Yes, the US has recommended that those high-risk patients. Yes, China has recommended that those high-risk patients over 50 with Sinopharm will need a booster at 6 months. So definitely, we have got a number of people in Trinidad who have Sinopharm. If they've had it and they're over 50, I think it would be a good idea, and the government will come up with the recommendation later on. But I'm suspecting that there will come a time that they will be recommended a booster. This is the end of my talk, and this is my normal end of my talk, which is Mount Hope where I work. But I thought this time I'd give you a little different picture, thanking you and thanking the staff who looked after me when I was in Cuba. And you can see from the pictures there, on the left, going anti-clockwise is when I was in my hospital at Cuba. I was on the inside as a patient, which is a completely new experience for me. And then I was transferred after that across to the Napa. I did not enjoy it, but I survived it. You may not be that lucky. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Mrna, and thank you for sharing that experience about you being on the other side too, as a patient. So thank you very much. At this time, Professor Terence Simongal, the Dean of the Faculty of Medical Science, UWI St. Augustine, will now present on the nature and science behind vaccines. And so I invite Professor Simongal, and who will also talk about those myths out there, you know, the thing about the chip inside of you and all of that. Professor Simongal.
Good day, everyone. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here, and I thank the Catholic Board for inviting me to share some thoughts about the science and the myths behind the virus. I want to also say it's a double pleasure for me to be able to share the panel with one of my mentors, Dr. Bratt, who was one of my teachers some more than 30 years ago in the medical school. And it is a great honor, Dr. Bratt, to see you here this evening, leading the charge, as it were. And I just want to thank you for what you are doing. So A bit about the science, and Ian has also given a bit of this, but I will expand a little bit more. One of the issues about the virus is the origin of the virus. Where has the virus come from? What's the science there? And it has given rise to a lot of, what for me are hypotheses, but what for people, I have to say, when I see the sort of arguments that people make, slightly misguided in a fair number of them. Now, the virus, coronaviruses, yes, numerous species of them in bats. So it is believed, on balance, that in some way it has come from animals, but that pathway from animals to us has not been clearly elucidated as yet. So most scientists believe it has come from animals. It's not a definitive conclusion as yet because studies are continuing on it. But having got into the human population, it spreads via droplets and aerosols, more so when there is rapid expulsion from the lungs, as might, for example, occur when people are breathing very rapidly and very deeply. We've had some spread, significant spread amongst choirs, for instance, sometimes in gyms. We have to bear these in mind. And what happens is that the virus goes into the upper airway, so the throat and the nasal passages, and it gets into the cells there, and it begins to spread. Within a few days, maybe 5 or 6, gets down into the airways, and you develop a cough, usually a dry cough, and then maybe a little bit of chest tightness. And there are other symptoms such as runny nose and sore throat, feeling of fatigue and tiredness, muscle pains. The airways, you see here the windpipe dividing into 2 main branches, which we call the main bronchi. That's the first division. There are about 24, 25 such divisions, all the way down like the roots of a tree. And when we go to the very end of one of these rootlets, we have this little area that looks like sponges all around it. And that's where the gas exchange occurs. Oxygen goes into the blood, your blood vessels, and carbon dioxide leaves the blood and comes into the airways and is then expelled. So sometime around day 10 or 11, in some people, about 20% of people, there is, as what Ian refers to as that acute inflammatory response that occurs around here. And the need for oxygen suddenly rises because the oxygen in your blood falls. That's when people have to go into hospital. And if it's really bad, they have to go into the intensive care unit. The virus, as Mr. Ramnarine was saying, has these spikes on its surface. And the spike constitutes a key. The cell has these receptors on it, which we might say is a lock. And if the key fits the lock, the cell opens to allow the virus to send its proteins into the cell. They then take over the cellular apparatus and begin to reproduce. And you see here, one virus can actually produce thousands of progeny. And that's how the virus replicates. Of course, the person breathes in and out, which you must do to live, but you send the viruses out to other people. So asymptomatic infection or mild infection is about 80% of cases, far more in children, as Dr. Bratt said. Hospitalization, about 20%. Of the hospitalized people, 5% will wind up in the intensive care unit. And the deaths worldwide, about 2.5%. Trinidad's death rate has been less than 2, sometimes a little more than 2%. I haven't measured it, calculated it recently, but it's around 2.5%. Of course, those who live, I want to point out, this was mentioned a little earlier, the illness can resolve, but a small, well, I have to say a variable proportion develop the post-COVID syndromes, which consists of organ-specific illnesses such as lung fibrosis, cardiac problems, neurologic problems, or for a chronic fatigue syndrome, especially those who've been in the intensive care unit, or the persistence of COVID symptoms of cough, shortness of breath, sore throat, runny nose, beyond 1 month, which we call long COVID or COVID long haulers. So there is a significant amount, and the proportion is about 15% to 30%, sometimes more in different studies. So it's a bit variable right now. But that long COVID syndrome represents significant morbidity in the population. And there's a loss of confidence in doing activities. So having described the features of COVID, I've mentioned death, and it is not likely that I mentioned death. 2.5% might sound like a small percentage to you, but in a population of 1 million people, it's 25,000 deaths just due to COVID. We come now, so we've looked at the other effects long term, but now we come to the myths about COVID, and there are a number of myths. And we were fortunate as a faculty that we could call on our social science colleagues, and we met with them on a committee headed by Professor Simeon from our faculty. And we looked at all of these myths, and we got them all together, and we sent them in a document to the Ministry of Health so they could understand the reason for people's differing thoughts about the virus and vaccines. So 1, drinking alcohol kills germs and protects from COVID. Drinking alcohol will not protect you from COVID. The alcohol that goes into the body is not going to kill any virus that's there. In fact, quite the opposite. You may lose control of yourself and go very close to people. And the closer you are, the more likely you are to get infection. Sunlight prevents infection. Once the virus is in us, sunlight is not going to kill the virus. We have to understand this. You saw, for example, a country that's full of sunlight like Jamaica having peaks. Ian just showed you that. And you know what has happened in Trinidad and Tobago. Hot pepper in the food cures COVID. Adding pepper to foods will not affect whether you get COVID or not. There's no evidence for it. No, it won't. Vitamin supplements will prevent, and other supplements will prevent COVID. Now, take vitamin D, for example. It has been shown to have an effect on the immune system. We have no doubt about that. So several vitamins, we need vitamins to live. We also need carbohydrates and we need proteins. If you starve yourself of these, you will be at risk of anything. But the research is not conclusive that high doses of any of these will prevent COVID. Bleach will kill COVID. Bleach will kill the virus, this is true, but it does not kill the disease. One world leader mentioned this, and people started to drink bleach. This is no lie, it happened, it was documented. It is a poisonous substance. Ingesting it will kill you. Do not drink bleach. Myth, eating garlic prevents COVID. Garlic is a well-known vegetable with a number of very positive health effects, but there's no evidence that it interferes with the progression of COVID. COVID is a virus just like HIV, absolutely not so. COVID, the SARS coronavirus 2, which causes COVID, is an RNA virus. HIV is a retrovirus. HIV works by using an enzyme called reverse transcriptase that turns its RNA into DNA. That does not happen with COVID. There is no reverse transcriptase enzyme in the virus we call SARS-CoV-2. Gargling with warm or salt water will prevent infection. It is true that coronaviruses cause sore throat, not just COVID. We have several other coronaviruses. We have one that's been with us for hundreds or even thousands of years, 229. And that doesn't cause any of the severe infections that you see with this one. So it is true that they cause sore throat, and so gargling will relieve the discomfort, but there's no evidence that it will stop infection. So those are some of the myths about the virus itself. So in summary, I've looked through the science of the virus and how it spreads to cause COVID, and I have discussed some of the myths. I'm quite happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Professor Simongal. And I would just like to acknowledge, of course, the fourth doctor who is with us, Dr. Prithviraj Bahadur Singh, who attended a presentation college San Fernando and was awarded a national scholarship, studied medicine at the University of the West Indies and specialized in community pediatrics in the UK. He's currently consultant community pediatrician at the Southwest Regional Health Authority and a lecturer in child health at UWI. A keen advocate for improving services for children with disability, author of the book For the Love of Pan, a novel about a boy with autism set in our local context. So we welcome Dr. Raj Bahadur Singh, and he has been answering a number of the questions. It is now time to get some greater clarifications. I know that Dr. Bahadur Singh have been answering some of the questions. Unfortunately, Dr. Bratt has to leave us at this time. He's at somebody else's residence and he has to reach home before the curfew. So we are very happy to have Dr. Bahadur Singh join the panel here to answer some questions. And at this time, I would like to ask any of the panelists to respond. Is there any instance where a parent should not vaccinate his or her child? Is there any instance where, a parent should not vaccinate his or her child with the COVID-19 vaccine?
Well, yes, if there is an allergic reaction to the vaccine. That is the one contraindication. If you have an illness and you need advice, then you would have to speak to your doctor, but there are no other contraindication. I mean, colleagues can share their views on that, but that's my understanding.
No, that's correct. Only if there's the actual contents of that particular vaccine. And I think you shared them earlier, the actual contents to look out for.
Yeah.
All right, good afternoon. I just comment from the point of view of myocarditis and children with cardiac lesions. There's no specific contraindication, but we do advise that children who have congenital cardiac lesions and may have active cardiac disease, and that they consult with their cardiologist for advice. In speaking to one of our cardiology colleagues, there are some children on medication with problems with heart failure who they may have caution in terms of taking the vaccine. So if there are cardiac lesions, we recommend that you consult with a cardiologist. And the Pediatric Society may also give some advice to the written on that situation, specific situation.
Yeah, I'd like to agree with that, but I must add something that these patients with underlying cardiac disease, whether it's congenital heart disease or acquired ones, are higher risk. And they should be really seriously considered for protection with vaccination, because if they do get COVID, they are more likely to have serious illness or even dying than others. So yes, check with your doctors, but they should be seriously considered.
Yeah, that's a good point here. But I think, so the reason that you would be advised to check with your doctor is not for your doctor to tell you no. They are very unlikely to tell you no. It is that you will know what complications to look out for should they happen with the vaccine. But I don't think that there's any evidence that such people are more likely to get any complication from the vaccine. And as Ian said, the complications from the virus far outweigh what would happen with the vaccine. And that's the point in the adults, it's the same way with the clots. That's the point, you made that point, Ian. That's the point that people have to understand, that the risk with the virus is much greater. Thank you.
Okay, can the COVID-19 vaccine be taken simultaneously with other vaccines, for instance, tetanus? Just this evening, a young lady was asking me that her 13-year-old sister took the tetanus 1 week ago. Can she go and take the COVID-19 vaccine at this time?
Generally, the vaccines can be given together. So if you have the Pfizer vaccine, you can give it along with other vaccines at the same time. If you have one vaccine, then there's a little wait period until you could take the Pfizer vaccine. But generally, they could be given together if it's all at the same time.
When you actually go to get vaccinated, they do check to see if you've had another vaccine within the last month, and they usually wait at the vaccination sites. They ask you to wait another month before taking the actual COVID vaccination.
I think the reason for that, if I could explain to the audience, the reason for that is the same thing like if you have had a febrile illness. We say wait a month, whatever the cause of the febrile illness, wait a month before you take the any vaccine, not just COVID vaccine, but any vaccine. Why? Because when you've had a vaccine does stimulate the immune system. So when you have your immune system stimulated, that's not the time to take a new vaccine. So it usually takes about a month for that to move to a period of stability. 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks, but we say play it safe 1 month, and then we say, okay, you have whatever vaccine you want. So I think as Dr. Barusing is saying, if you take the tetanus with the Pfizer one time, but if you've taken the tetanus first, you should wait a little while to let the immune response to the tetanus vaccine take place, and then you go on to any other vaccine you need to take.
Okay.
There's often sorry, Mr. Mitchell, there's often a lot of confusion about what the vaccine actually does. And this might help a bit, that when you take the vaccine, you actually get exposed to something and you want your body to produce a response. And there are things that delay this response and that make the response not be as good as you want it to be, such as people who are on certain medication like steroids or methotrexate or other things to suppress the body's response. Some people who have like diabetes and could be pretty bad and they don't have a response. And similarly, as Professor Simangal was trying to explain, that, you know, if you just had a vaccine, you've already stressed the immune system a certain amount and you would not get the full benefit of vaccination. You're going through all this trouble to take a vaccine. You really want to get the best benefit of it. And similarly, that's why the delay in time for the booster shot, why we try to get it in such a period of time to get the most out of the 2 shots. But it takes time after the shot to develop that immune response. And you can't walk around like Superman after your second shot. You know, you still have to wait your 2 weeks for your body to respond to it. And it sometimes takes even longer than that with people who have serious illnesses or on certain medication.
Okay, and the next question is, how soon after a child who contracted COVID and has recovered, how soon can that child take the vaccine?
The current recommendation is a month after. They were waiting for it in the UK. That's what they're using. Over here, initially with the Prime Minister's illness, they were talking about 6 months, and I saw that they reduced the recommendation down to 3 months. So I think the current I'm not 100% sure, but I'll stand to be corrected. The current recommendation in Trinidad is 3 months after full recovery.
I think in Trinidad,
if I could add to that,
3 months right now. Most people are using 3 months.
If I could add to that, there's a very rational explanation for this. The immune response to the virus itself lasts 6 months or more. So this is why initially they said there is in a time where you have limited vaccines, then if you've had COVID, there's no rush, there's no need to go and take it right away. But as for all, as I said earlier, of all febrile illness, 4 weeks later, you can have it. So you can have it, as Ian said, 4 weeks later. It's a febrile illness like any other. But, and I have to tell you, people shouldn't be afraid that because they had COVID, they should not take the vaccine. The studies have actually shown that people who have had COVID and who have had the vaccine get a better immune response. In other words, they are better protected against future infection. So that is not the scare. All we were saying is that in a case where you want to vaccinate as much of your population that's not protected as possible, if you've had COVID, well, you could wait a while. But people who haven't had it need to get the vaccine as soon as possible.
And to add to what Professor is saying, I mean, it depends on the timing, the number of vaccines that you have available in the country, and use of resources. All these things have governed our response to vaccination. In the UK, when they got the first batch of AstraZeneca, they deliberately delayed their second shot from 3 weeks, as recommended, up to between 8 and 12 weeks, with great response to it. And that's why we use our new protocol, but it was all based on availability of vaccines. And for kids, when you're going back down to the 12 to 18-year-olds, it's an important factor to consider why there's variation in the recommendation. The CDC recommends all 12 to 18s to be vaccinated, and they have access to vaccines for them. Whereas WHO doesn't. They say the only 12 to 18s that must be vaccinated, the high-risk ones that we spoke about. But they don't go all out and say, oh, all 12 to 18 should be vaccinated, and they say flat that they are a low-risk population. And part of the reason for that is if you're in a poor country and your country doesn't have the resources there to vaccinate everyone, your resources should be concentrated on those who need to be vaccinated, which are high-risk elderly people and those who have comorbidities, not your low-risk children who are likely to have mild disease. And this is what Dr. Bratt was alluding to earlier on when he said, you know, initially he didn't think it was necessary for us to vaccinate children, but he's changed his mind. And I fully support that move. I think that all 12 to 18-year-olds should now be vaccinated if they can handle it, if there's not a contraindication, simply because as a country in Trinidad and Tobago, we're seeing too many people who are having problems, not from COVID, but because of this lockdown and other issues. So the information, the one thing you're going to see is that the information is going to change. And sit tight and look for what the current recommendation is. No apologies over the changes because the information is coming fast and furious.
Okay, people are calling the vaccines experimental. How do we respond to that?
Okay, so the word is emergency use authorization. So what's the emergency? The emergency is a pandemic of global, well, as pandemics will be, of global proportions. And the last pandemic came, the really bad pandemic, that was the one with the high death rate, which was the one in 1917, 1918. We didn't have vaccines that we could give. In fact, they didn't even know what it was. They thought it was a form of bubonic plague. It was some 15 years later or so that they found out it was the flu virus. So we have a vaccine that's available, and I think as Mr. Ramnarayan explained, it is not something that is entirely new. So yes, in an ideal world, you'd have liked to have tested it for 4 or 5 years, but we simply do not have that luxury, because while you're testing it, your death rate, or as one of my colleagues said recently, the body count will be rising. The studies with the vaccine have not shown any serious risk to people. And when we put them out in the population in millions, you saw some very, very rare side effects developing, which the benefits of the vaccine far outweighed these. Now, that balancing of risk is something that has been puzzling to the population because we don't tend to think in those terms, but we have to get used to it because we do it every day. And I want to point out to people that the risk of hospitalization generally is 1 in 5. And as Mr. Ramrine said, the risk, if you take the vaccine of this very rare clot, is very, very low, a few in a million. And every day we go into motor cars and we seem to forget that the risk of death from a motor vehicle accident, as assessed in 2019 in Trinidad and Tobago, was about 117 per million. Far more than the risk of anything that happens with the vaccine, any of the severe side effects. So there were a lot of studies that were done that have justified the use of the vaccines. It is an emergency use authorization, and there is an emergency. So I think when you look at it that way, I can't see why anybody will call it experimental. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor.
Sorry, Mr. Mitchell, just a second. I mean, there's a lot of fear in the community about taking the vaccines. And there are a number of different reasons that the professor has gone at great lengths to try and elucidate what's the truth from what's the myth. But the fact remains that there are risks with vaccines. The most important overriding issue is that these risks are minuscule. We're talking about one, Dr. Bratt went into the details of how many complications there were in the US with Pfizer vaccines. It was 9,000 in 9 million vaccine shots, of which 1,000 were a bit more serious than to be concerned about. But what people are ignoring completely is the risk of getting COVID. When they get COVID, the risks of vaccination pale in comparison. So that's what we talk about, weighing the balance of what the issues are. I would prefer not to have been vaccinated. I honestly would have. But I know fully well having that my good fortune to have survived COVID once would not necessarily be the same thing the second time around. And at the time when I did get it, there was no other option. There was no vaccine there. So I'm looking for any little benefit to survive that I can get. But I can understand why people are afraid of new technology and what's going on. Having said all of that, there are billions of people who have been vaccinated around the world, and the body count continues to rise from COVID, mainly in the unvaccinated.
Okay, thank you. I know we alluded to myocarditis, and a parent wanted to know what are the symptoms if somebody comes down with that.
Yeah, I answered that one, on the internet. I pointed out chest pain, palpitations, even a feeling of tightness in the chest, dizziness. Those are the typical features of myocarditis. I would encourage Mr. Mitchell, if I can just go back, if you indulge me a minute. Sure. If I could just go back to the previous question. And I'm noting here on the internet that the Vaccination Act of 1853 introduced mandatory smallpox vaccination in England. And I want to tell people why you think any government would pass an act to have mandatory vaccination. It will have to be because people were refusing. It will have to be. So this concept that we see in here, where people are saying this vaccine is not trustworthy, this is a mentality that has been present for the last 150 years in our society. This is nothing new. That is why the UK passed the Vaccination Act. And in the last century, all of us here, the elderly ones, would have been vaccinated against smallpox without any side effects. So, and when it was introduced, then it would have been emergency use authorization, I suppose, if that term was used then. So I want to tell people, this hesitation with vaccine is nothing new. It is a mentality that some people, misdirected or misguided as they are spreading widely. And I'm not taking on the world or, for this, but I just want to point out, it's nothing new. To the extent where the UK, go and search it yourself on the internet. I just put in smallpox vaccine history UK law. And I see the Vaccination Act of 1853 had to be passed. So I'm just telling people that this is nothing new. And we need to do, as the panel is suggesting, balance the risk for yourself and talk to your doctors, and you're going to get the same information, and you will begin to feel a little comfortable about it. Thank you, Chair.
So this brings me to a very important question. So should the Parliament pass laws that make it mandatory for everyone to enter a school must be vaccinated, both staff and students? Yeah. What are your views on that? I know it might be controversial, but what are your views?
So my views are, no, I am Dean of Medicals. Oh, sorry, our member, yes, sir, Mr. Attorney General.
Well, as the person who has, good afternoon. First of all, Prof. and distinguished members, thank you for such a fantastic discourse in relation to where we are. I'd just like to say, as the person who has the responsibility to draft laws for Trinidad and Tobago, that the issue of mandatory vaccinations is not upon us right now. I can tell you that I have calculated all options, as any good presman is supposed to do. I'm supposed to be prepared. There are multiple versions of laws that do prevail. The use of mandatory vaccines and vaccination policies for schools in particular has been with us for a very, very long time. But what we are promoting as a government is a voluntary exercise at this particular juncture. What I'd like to say is that the need to demystify the propaganda and to address genuine hesitancy as opposed to propaganda is a very critical part of this mission. Dr. Ramnarine gave us a phenomenal discourse, Professor Simangal as well, and Dr. Bratt. And when you look at that combined effort of clarification, I just want to say thank you very much to all of you. Mr. Mitchell, I have a difficulty at this juncture in having to run to another meeting that I am doing online at the same time. So may I please humbly excuse myself from the meeting at this point. Forgive me, I'm sort of multitasking. We have hampers that we're building out in terms of distribution, hence my poor attire at this point. I'm really dealing with hamper distribution as another mechanism of relief at the same time. So may I please have your permission to run off on this meeting at this point, but to remind that the office of the Member of Parliament for San Fernando West and as Attorney General, I am 100% reachable and available on all these matters.
Thank you very much, AG, for joining with us and partnering with us this evening. We have one more question.
Mr. Mitchell, no, but you did ask our personal views.
Yes,
I don't mind stating mine. Our students are involved in human health, and I certainly see no problem in saying that if you are going to see people who are ill, and we don't want you to be asymptomatic and carrying the virus. I know that, and the vaccine will decrease the risk of that. So it doesn't stop it entirely. So I think everything should be done to decrease risk to your patients. So I would support that, certainly for people who are involved in the health sciences.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Ian, will you support?
Yeah, I mean, no, but that's a different issue that Professor is dealing with, which is dealing with vulnerable people. Certainly, I work in many hospitals, public and private, and I've seen, sadly, where people have come in COVID negative and ended up being COVID positive through contact within the hospital system, whether it's from the staff, from their own visitors coming in, or from other patients. So I think that, you know, it's nothing is black and white in terms of yes here, no there at all. And any attempt to do mandatory in school is going to be met with a lot of opposition about it, of course. But you've asked for the opinion. Certainly what Professor Simangal is talking about, I think it should be mandatory if you're caring for vulnerable people. You should make every single attempt to protect them on a health and safety issue, to protect those vulnerables there. The school is a different issue. As far as mandatory for school, until we have a number of other issues dealt with, it's going to be difficult because the schooling has not only ill children. There are a number of ill children inside the high-risk people who attend your school, and they need to be vaccinated, right, for their own protection. But around them will be a number of colleagues who they adhere, who they work with, who they play sports with even. And you've got an aging teacher population who are at risk as well, who would be at risk. So I'm sorry, in terms of my personal opinion, these are just the issues. And my opinion is at this time, there is no rule that's going to be, I don't think having it mandatory is going to make any sense as yet until we sort out the other issues, such as how we're going to open up schools again. Now, if the government takes a policy that we really want to reopen the place and we're going to move down the route of mandatory vaccination for everyone, we've already seen what's happened up the islands and the protests in St. Kitts, in St. Vincent, and what the population's opinion about that is. It will be very, very difficult to put through. So it is a tool to be used, but now is not the time to use that tool. Let's try our very best to encourage it. And on that note, what I'd like to say is I've done several talks with a lot of people who are not anti-vaxxers. They are pro-vaxxers, but they're hesitant. They're not sure about taking it, and they have other issues to be dealt with. We still have a large gap. So when I keep saying other things need to be dealt with, seminars like what you're having here are key to dealing with that. There are many people who've made up their minds about being vaccinated, and they've made their way to the vaccination center and made their business to get vaccinated. We're not talking about those people. We're talking the ones who are hesitant and are not sure and may have health issues or not sure which vaccine to take. That requires a more individual approach and a more community-based approach, such as coming into your school and seeing what, addressing it on a one-to-one basis about what the issues you have. Bring them all up one by one and see, look, what do you think? What do you think? And you may have to repeat that episode. But going down the mandatory route, I can't see myself ever pushing for that.
Okay, thank you very much, Doctor. And at this point, I would like to give the doctors to say some final comments, and then we will do the wrap up and do a little vote of thanks. So, Dr. Ian, the spotlight is on you if you'd like to make some final comments at this time.
It's quite simple. Get vaccinated. The benefits far outweigh the risk of getting COVID, and I'm not just talking off the top of my head, I'm talking from experience. And there are other things that you can die from apart from COVID, such as being home locked up, being your diabetes, your hypertension, your other illnesses will not be treated. So do yourself a favor and get vaccinated. Let's get opened up and let's get back to the business at hand. Thanks very much for having me.
Dr. Bahadur Singh, your final words.
Hi, good afternoon. Well, as a pediatrician, I strongly recommend the vaccination for kids 12 to 18. Parents who still have questions should ask advice from their physicians, and try to make an informed decision along with speaking to their child about taking the vaccine. So generally in the pediatric community, we strongly recommend the vaccination for 12 to 18 years. Okay, thanks.
Okay, Professor Simangal.
Get vaccinated. If you have any doubts, speak to your doctor. Or get vaccinated. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, thank you very much. And just before I say some thanks, just to let especially the parent body out there know, the data for presentation, College San Fernando and vaccinated staff members. As of today, the teaching staff, we have 45 out of 51 members of staff vaccinated.
Well done.
The civil service staff, we have 6 out of 7. The security staff, we have 2 out of 4. The private teaching staff, all vaccinated. Out of the maintenance and cleaners, we have 8 out of 9 cleaners. So we're in a good space, and it's now about getting our students vaccinated. I would like to say thank you for this webinar tonight. Vicar General Father Martin Sergiu, who stood in for His Grace the Archbishop, MP Honorable Faris Al-Rari, who has been spearheading so many efforts in San Fernando West, and accommodating all the schools in San Fernando West with the vaccination drive. Our hardworking Chief Executive Officer of the Catholic Education Board of Management, Mrs. Sharon Mangro, who was very excited when we spoke about this project. Thank you for being here this evening. Our National Youth Vaccine Coordinator, Mr. Richard Robinson, coming out of the Scout movement. And again, we want volunteers out there, so you can text 682-7514 to volunteer. Thank you very much, Mr. Robinson. Our esteemed panelists, Dr. Bratt, Dr. Ramnarine, Professor Simangal, and Dr. Bahadur Singh for lending us your expert advice and for taking time out on a Friday evening to be with us. All those persons working behind the scene, including UE Principal Professor Copeland, who graciously consented to let us use UE's Zoom platform to host this evening's webinar, and his point person, Ms. Chanel Glasgow, who facilitated us, all hours of the night in making sure that we get it right. Dr. Joel T. Luxing, the doctor that we see on CNC 3, and Dr. Kerry Benjamin, both who were very interested in being part of this and who played their part in the background in getting others to come on board and so on. Mr. Terrence John, Donny Ramjit Singh, Frazan Abdul, our technical team working behind the scenes, members of staff from our school, our vice principal, our dean, Mr. Maraj, and a fellow teacher out of Presentation College in Chaguanas. We thank you very much for assisting us. Mr. Stephen Samlal Singh, principals, teachers, and parents who ensured that this message went out. Much thanks to you. And as we close, please remember the 3 W's. Wash your hands, wear your mask, watch your distance. And I want to say something, and I want to put this out there in the national community. Vaccinate to be cool. We all want to go back to school. So good night, thank you, and God bless.